Hello, welcome to Celia Ceramics, where I make random shit out of clay. I do pottery, I make clay dolls. So I've been working on trying to make my own series of dolls. I wanted them to be posable and I wanted them to be in my own style. So today I'm gonna walk you through some of my prototypes and my newest doll that I just finished yesterday. So for those of you who don't know, I really love dolls. Coraline is my favorite movie, so I've been trying to design my own posable doll. And I finally come up with a design that I really like. So today I'm going to walk you through my first doll versus my most current doll that I finished yesterday. I feel like I learned a lot between making my first doll and then making my most recent doll. It was just a lot of like technical things to making a posable doll to make sure it can stand and that the arms can move without complication. Anyway, thank you so much for watching my first video and let's go straight to the dolls. Okay, so Burberry was the first posable doll that I ever made. And unfortunately, it really shows in his quality. One of the hardest things that you'll come across if you decide to ever make your own posable doll is attaching fur. I went into this thinking, I've repaired a couple holes in my plushies here and there, like, I got this. I know how to sew well enough to do this. And I was humbled. I know looks can be deceiving, but I want to make it very clear that his limbs are not properly attached to the rest of his body. Sometimes you can see some of his stuffing just poking out, and not only that, but when I wanted to color him, because I didn't want him like a white or a neutral color, I decided to airbrush him, which is a huge mistake. Because not only are his limbs holding on for dear life, but he's also super crunchy feeling. I watered down the acrylic paint a ton before I put it in the airbrush, but even doing really light layers still had the same effect. I just couldn't get over the idea of someone buying a doll and then feeling like they can't really touch it. I know most dolls are usually purely for display, but I also wanted people to feel like there was some kind of positive sensory element to my dolls. They can run their hands through the fur or pose the doll for pictures. Adding soft fur just makes the whole doll seem more alive. In the end, I just realized that airbrushing and sewing were not the methods for me in my dolls. I want to start by saying, yes, her name is Iridium. I was replaying all the Borderland games when I made her, and it's also why I happened to paint her purple. Now, Iridium was more of a sculpting error. Since I still wasn't sure how I was going to attach the fur, I decided to make the hands and feet longer when I sculpted them. I was worried that she was going to look like she didn't have any shoulders or really any legs, and it had the complete opposite effect because that's how she came out looking. So now she just looks like she's wearing a tank top at all times. So when I went in to attach her hands and her feet to the rest of the skeleton, they ended up being way too long. My boyfriend ended up having to go in with a little handsaw and cut off her ankles and her elbows. And even then, it just couldn't be saved. They would not attach right. I just couldn't get them to stay in no matter how many times I glued them back in. That left foot on the bunny is basically detached. I also added way too much plush to the base of his body, so he was just thick for no reason. However, the fur was one of the most successful parts of this doll. The fur attached really well, even though it looks really funky because the hands and feet wouldn't attach. I was able to accomplish the bright colored fur without all the shedding or any of the crunchiness of the previous doll. I also completely redesigned the eyes from the previous doll. I decided to go with a simpler eye design, removing that white gleam that made it look like the sun was always hitting it because I just didn't feel like it needed it. I also had trouble trying to find a fur color that matched the color I already painted him. I felt like it just didn't blend well, so I just moved on to the next one. Okay, and then there's Chester. Now surprisingly, Chester was the first doll where I had trouble putting the skeleton together. As you can see in this clip right here, his leg is very clearly broken. So when I built his armature, I ended up making the hands and the feet with like a single wire. And since I hadn't had any problems with the armature beforehand, I was very overly confident when I handed him to my boyfriend and said, hey, check how posable he is, not thinking that his leg would completely shatter. I also completely ruined one of his eyes when I was repainting him, so he was just a bust. He's the reason I took a break from making dolls. Okay, now Lizzie was my first attempt at making an art toy. I thought that maybe my style would look better in a toy versus making a whole doll and that this process would be easier, and I gotta admit, it's really not that much harder than making a regular doll. But I fell in love with her style. Like, I really like this little devil baby and I couldn't figure out why. Even though she didn't fully cook, therefore her paint didn't really stay and she can't really stand up on her own. This was my first time successfully sculpting a human-looking face, which, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't think I was capable of. This doll challenged me to sculpt something other than animals. I decided to take some time to research what features I really like in a cute human face, and in the end, I ended up with a creature that's somewhere in between all of my work. Her. Now, I don't have a name for her yet since I just finished her the other day, but I am so proud of how this doll came out. She is the perfect representation of my style. Up until this point, all my dolls have been animals. This was my first time figuring out a more human face. Not only that, but I learned how to build her hair inside of her head. So not only was I able to pull on it, but I was able to cut it and give her her own individual style. Her armature was perfect, her posability was great. The only downside is that, as you can see, she had a lollipop at one point that I ended up having to break and rip out of her hand. But other than that, she's perfect. I can fix that. I can hit that with some paint, remake the lollipop. The one thing that I didn't mention in some of the previous dolls, and really a problem I'm still having, is how to set paint in a matte way. All of my varnishes, for some reason, always come out shiny. It doesn't matter if it says matte, and it looks horrible alongside the eyes. I feel like skin is always supposed to be matte, so that's something I'm still trying to figure out. So if you have any tips on setting acrylic paint in a matte way, please let me know. I would really appreciate it. She's also a little taller than I would have liked. I feel like whenever I've made a doll even slightly too tall, they've come out kind of terrifying, but overall, I also decided as a quick bonus, I'm going to show you guys some of the pottery that I've been working on really quick. None of it's been bisqued yet, but I thought I'd give you a sneak peek anyway. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into talking about my pottery because I plan to make a whole nother video about this since this is my studio space, but this was my first time experimenting with putting a face on one of my mugs. I love the way that tail came out. I thought it looked super cool. Like I said, none of this stuff has been bisqued yet, so I'm still just hoping and praying it makes it out of the kiln alive. Now, these cloud mugs are a design I've been working on for some time, and they're finally where I want them to be. I love the carvings on the inside with the slip work on the outside. It's just so much of the good kind of contrast. And I made multiple, just in case of a kiln disaster, because you know how glaze firings go. But anyway, future bisque and glazing should be up in another video soon. I'm currently working on my most latest doll that is in a similar style to the little devil or imp doll that I showed earlier. I'll throw in a little sneak peek here. But that'll have a lot more of me actually making the dolls and putting them together. I am planning to put some of these dolls up for sale, so stay tuned if you want to see them enter my shop soon. Anyway, that's all. Thank you so much for watching.